Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm recapping my experience at Collecticon Los Angeles. This was a 2-day event. I only went on the Sunday, though. At all of these conventions, a lot of them are like 2 or 3 days sometimes even 4 days, but I only go, so far I've only gone like just on one day. And this one specifically, I went on the Sunday because that's when all the panels were happening. I was like, okay, I definitely want to go to see all these panels. This one was different in the sense that there was no artist alley, unfortunately. So because I love walking around, seeing all of the amazing artwork that people create and chatting with vendors and stuff. But what was really cool was that there were a lot of collectibles, like it's in the name, Collecticon, a lot of cards to purchase, like rare Pokemon cards and stuff. And that like took me back a little bit. And I feel like I might have mentioned this on the podcast at some point. Maybe when I discussed Yu-Gi-Oh! The abridged series way back. You know, it's been several years now. I think that was in 2019. But whatever, you can go back and listen to that if you're interested. That's one of my favorite episodes to date of this podcast because just quoting that, hilarious. I'm cracking up just thinking of it. But anyway, Pokemon for me as a kid was something I sort of got into, and it was only briefly. I kind of dipped my toe into checking out the series and being vaguely interested in the cards and stuff like that, similar with Yu-Gi-Oh! At the time. But I never really fully got into either one of the franchises. Yu-Gi-Oh! I specifically got into years later, really through Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series by Little Karibo, which is still going strong. It's on the 5th and final season now of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. And so then, it was really during the pandemic then, when I had started watching Yu-Gi-Oh! The dubbed version, the 4Kids dubbed version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it was on Netflix at the time, but only season 3. So I had watched season 3, and then I had gone back to the beginning to watch season 1, which was available on Hulu. Like they had the full 5 seasons. And I still haven't watched the entire series. I stopped really after season 5. I'm going to have to finish it because I know season 5, obviously, it's the conclusion of the show. And it's the whole thing where they go back to the ancient Egyptian times. I know the whole conclusion, like the epic finale, is the pharaoh dueling Yugi. So where am I going with all this? All this to say is that I was like, what? I lost the thread I was going with this on this tangent. That I never really got so big into Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. For me, Pokemon, the most I got into in terms of like the fandom and the games and stuff specifically was Pokemon Stadium, playing that on the N64. I never really got into I know first it was like the games and then the anime came out, but I only saw the anime a little bit here and there. But all of that to say is that this was a big homage to those shows in particular. And Pokemon to this day is the biggest franchise globally, still going strong, obviously. I know there's like so many spin-offs and everything with Pokemon. Pokemon, gotta catch them all. Speaking of, just to, because that was toward the beginning of the con when I got there anyway, Jason Page, the original singer of that Pokemon theme song, performed the song. And to me, it was surprising in the moment, but in hindsight, unsurprisingly, I got a wave of emotion. I was like, oh my God, like I just like a wave of emotion hit me in that moment when he started singing. I was like, oh, there's something about this song that is just, it stands the test of time. It's just a genuinely fun, energetic, like amazing theme song that's just, and it's so upbeat and positive and like uplifting, like I want to be the very best that no one ever was. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and sing the whole thing, but it's playing in my head at this moment. But it was amazing because, so he sang some other songs as well, but once that started, that music, I was like, oh man, Pokemon, gotta catch 'em all. I don't know how Jason Page does it, and he had said it's a hard song to sing, but what was great, so he was performing it. And then some person dressed up as Charizard walked out and was dancing. I was like, this is fantastic. I love it. Heck yeah. So, the nostalgia got swept up in it a little bit. It was great. But for me specifically with that song, I had danced to it years ago. Like years and years, late 90s. I had danced to that song which is funny. Like, I don't know. In hindsight, I don't know why. I guess because it was popular at the time. Whatever. I'm getting like lost in my memories for a moment now. But anyway, so at this convention, so it was at a venue I had been to before, but it was only in one room. So because there was another event going on at the same time. So like it was only in this one room. And at first, actually, it was a little confusing figuring out where to go specifically because this convention center is honestly so huge. It's the biggest one I've been to date with all these conventions that I've been to so far. And usually it's fairly simple. Like with LA Comic Con, for instance, they have like huge banners of where to pick up badges and you just kind of follow the crowds. With this one too, then I was kind of like following other people just to figure out where to go. So eventually figuring it out. But it was a little confusing because there was no signs or anything. But then we were asking people, it's like, is this where you go for the entrance for the convention? So it all worked out, but still that took like a little maneuvering. It took like an extra 20 minutes, I want to say, to finally figure it out. And then thankfully I didn't have a big bag. So like once I got my wristband, I was able to just go right in. I didn't have to like wait in line for the security check to go through and look at your bag. I just was like, they said like, yeah, you can go right in because you got your little bag. So I just like showed them real quick and I was able to go right in. Just the small things, that I'm like, that just like makes things more streamlined. So that was nice. So as always, like when I get there, I just kind of walk around, take everything in. I quickly saw like where all of the voice actors and everyone were signing. They were all along this one wall, basically all lined up. And then the rest of it there was the big stage, the main stage where all the panels will be happening. And then there was all of the vendors and a lot of trading cards, things like that. So nothing necessarily that I was interested in. There was some like vintage video game stuff, so I couldn't help but look at that stuff. A lot of N64 games. I saw also some SNES games. I like kept my eye out. I was like, if I see a Yoshi's Island, that's a sign. I'm just gonna buy it, but I didn't see one. I was like, Yoshi's Island. I never owned that game, but my grandma had it, and I would always play it. And getting lost in memories again, I'm telling you, the power, nostalgia is a hell of a drug. Because again, I was like, I liked, I barely watched Pokemon, but obviously I know about the characters and how huge of a franchise it is. And so again, like once he started singing that song, or once it started playing, I was like, oh man, I'm like getting briefly misty-eyed, like just like, it was like literally a quick wave of it. And I was like, okay, no, let me just enjoy the performance. Too funny. But yeah, man, oh my goodness. I don't know. Isn't it interesting, like just the visceral reaction of things like that? I don't know. It's powerful. I just do find it interesting. I don't know. Because I've mentioned this before, like for example, when I first saw Steve Burns in person at my first LA Comic Con, my first fan convention for that matter, back in LA Comic Con 2022, that I got emotional seeing Steve Burns in person. And just every once in a while, just seeing these people that we grew up watching, it's just like a lovely thing to see them in person and just like see them again, like outside of what we know them for, like seeing Steve Burns as a person and like, oh, he's a musician. Obviously he does other things. And he was really involved with the new version of Blue's Clues, as in like writing and directing it as well. And so that's really cool. But I digress. I'm only bringing that up because like that's just another example of like when I just got hit by a wave of emotion seeing him in person. So this too, hearing that Pokemon theme song, it slaps. It slaps. You know that. It's incredible. It's a fun song. Simple as that. Gets you pumped. It's an amazing song, Anyway, so the thing with this one was that unlike with Pasadena Comic Con, where there wasn't any panels with that one, unfortunately, with this one, it was the opposite, where there was no artist alley, so I was able to actually sit and enjoy all the panels. I wasn't necessarily planning on doing that, but I had a great seat. I just had a front row seat, and I was like, I'm just going to sit and enjoy myself here because I'm not interested really in any of the stuff to purchase. I looked around just like to scope it all out, see things, There was other cute like crochet stuff, things like that as well, but nothing really that I felt I like needed to buy, because I've bought stuff in the past, but mostly again, like from artists, things like that. And again, I'm not interested in the trading cards, even though it was cool stuff though. Like you see it behind glass, like in great condition, and it's cool. But anyway, so I just was like, I'm going to just check out the panels. And I was like, even if it's some things I didn't necessarily grew up with or anything, I was like, had no like emotional connection to it. I was like, oh, let's just go check them out. So the first one was Demon Slayer. And I was like, I never even saw Demon Slayer. It was mostly like anime stuff, but I was like, why not? So I'll check it out. And that was fun. And the one after that was Pokemon. And so it was with Veronica Taylor, the original voice of Ash Ketchum. And again, like when these voice actors just like go into their characters, to me, it's like a superpower. It's like the person disappears and they become that character, however briefly, like just in that moment. Because even like their body language changes, like they embody that character. So I think it's amazing. I don't know, it's just so cool. Like, his classic, Pikachu, I choose you. Like the original Ash Ketchum. Like I distinctly remember that voice because that was the original. And like I watched a little bit on Cartoon Network at the time when it premiered back in the day, in the US anyway, I should say, obviously. But so she was actually there with her daughter, and it's like she was saying at the time, like she didn't know she was pregnant with her. So like that's amazing. She's like, I had like a little Pokemon growing in my Pokeball, as in like in her uterus. Then in that case, I was like, oh man, that's too funny. But so the two of them actually now host a podcast called The Trainer's Guide. I believe that's what it's called. I'm sure you could find it on Spotify, wherever you're listening to my podcast, you could probably find it there as well. That's what I'm trying to say, the same platform. It's her and her daughter, and it's like a watch-through podcast again. They're going through the first season of Pokemon. I guess up until, I don't know when she left the series. I don't even know what happened there. Was it, I think, like when it was a company change or whatever it was, and then I guess they had to I don't really even know because, again, I'm not really in the fandom, but that's always unfortunate when they have to recast and, but I guess also because like it's different versions of the, like, different series and stuff like that. But they mentioned like the Butterfree episode that was emotional and like the original movie and stuff like that. But obviously Pokemon is still such a huge franchise. I mean, Pokemon Go back in 2016, summer of 2016 was like peak Pokemon Go. Everyone was playing it. And what I distinctly remember about that just, for me, like just stands out to me is that Jim Parsons, who played Sheldon Cooper on The Big Bang Theory, I remember at the time he had posted on Instagram. It was kind of like huge franchises colliding. It was like a huge post on Instagram, and it was a picture of Sheldon's spot in The Big Bang Theory set, and then a Pikachu sitting on there, like a Pikachu from Pokemon Go. And then the caption was, "You've got to be kidding." And it got like millions and millions of likes. I was like, Pikachu in Sheldon's spot. That's like just defining pop culture. I don't know, something about that, because Big Bang Theory, as much as people hate that show, it's also like a love letter to all these huge franchises that people love, like Star Trek, Star Wars in particular, stuff like that, like nerd culture, geekdom, all of the Marvel superheroes, things like that. So like it just was like a funny, surreal thing that like literally Pikachu is in Sheldon's spot, and like Jim Parsons acknowledging that, and that just was so funny. So that's like, for me, for some reason, I like thinking of Pokemon Go, I'm like, yep, Pikachu was in Sheldon's spot. Again, I digress. I do that all the time. Obviously, you know that by now. But I mean, with nostalgia, it's just like, it's important not to get too swept up in it. That's the thing with these conventions, that I personally see them more as like a networking opportunity. Like when I went, like I go to these conventions and I get to talk to artists, and then I've had the pleasure of interviewing them on this podcast. In this case, unfortunately, there was no Artist Alley, as I said, so couldn't do that this time with this one. But obviously a big part of them as well, despite that, is like the consumer side of it. It's like all these vendors. So you're there to purchase stuff that you want to buy, and like you're supporting these artists, but then there's all these vendors selling this cool stuff. So yeah, the Pokemon one was fun. And then the panel after that was Women of Anime, which was great. So that was a few different voice actors: Christina V, Erica Schroeder, Brina Palencia, and Lauren Landa. What was really nice was that they were singing the praises of each other. There was like some clips of them each singing, for example, and then one of them was saying, "Oh, I didn't even know you sang. That's amazing. You got a beautiful voice." Like, so they were really being supportive of one another, because also March, it's Women's History Month. So like they mentioned that too. And just saying like how they're all like rock stars and stuff. That was, for me, like the biggest takeaway was basically they were very humble, the actors and stuff. all of them like saying they're so blessed to be a part of this big franchise that people love, because after that one was the Naruto, which is another anime I never really got into. I wasn't into like the shonen anime. I was more so into the shoujo anime, But I don't think I've ever seen a full episode of Naruto, but I know of the characters a little bit. But so that was some of the voice actors for the English dub of Naruto, like Miley Flanagan, who voices Naruto, and then Debbie Mae West, David Lodge, and there was one other person there as well. I'm blanking on the name. But, because then also the Yu-Gi-Oh panel, I was like, oh, I definitely got to see the Yu-Gi-Oh panel with Eric Stewart and Dan Green. In particular, what they were saying, like Dan Green was saying that it's very humbling when people come up to me and say, like, oh, you were a big part of my childhood, whatever it may be, like some version of that. Because a lot of these voice actors say that, because obviously it's, these shows we grew up with as kids that we still have that were like seminal in our childhood and things like that. But so what he was saying was that we were just one part of it. And Dan Green was saying that, but also Eric Stewart was saying that as well, because saying it's like, well, like, I appreciate when people say that, but he was saying, but like, you love the character. Because at one point someone asked like someone asked Eric Stewart in particular, because also he was the voice of Brock and James, Team Rocket. Team Rocket were great. I'm just like remembering that now. They were hilarious. But what Eric Stewart was saying was that, because like somehow came up on the subject of how movies nowadays, but also it's been like that for years now, that movies in particular, they hire celebrities to voice the characters, and because it's to get, like, for them to promote the films. Like, I get it, it's all marketing, things like that. But what he was saying was that with that, then it just becomes, oh, it's this celebrity, just like you're just hearing it for the celebrity. Whereas with their shows, with these kinds of shows, it's more so about the character. Like for those characters in particular, he said, like, you didn't know probably at the time that Brock and James were the same voice actor, right? And people were saying, yeah. He's like, exactly, that's the whole point. It's like James is James and Brock is Brock. It's not about how Eric Stewart is these characters. So basically it's like about the character, not about the voice actor. And so like they appreciate the fans' admiration, but also they're humble in the sense that they know they're just one part of it. That's basically like summing it up. And they were very respectful and praising each other, Dan Green and Eric Stewart. And also just seeing Dan Green too, I got like a little bit emotional too, because Dan Green just seems like an incredible human being. I don't know, there's something about Dan Green. And also he's an artist, and I think it's just because he has such integrity for the craft, and Eric Stewart as well. Like, because Eric Stewart, like, he kind of plays into I think it's like he knows what the fans want to hear in terms of like about Seto Kaiba, for example. By the way, like, not to go on a whole tangent again with Seto Kaiba, you can listen to my episode on Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Side of Dimensions if you want to hear me just totally fangirl, like blatantly fangirl over Seto Kaiba, because that's where I'm really just like didn't hold back with that. Oh boy, that's embarrassing in hindsight, but I don't care, because Seto Kaiba, he's hot in Dark Side of Dimensions. Anyway, I appreciate that they just have such reverence, I guess, for the fandom and for the characters. That's really beautiful. And obviously, like, they spoke so highly of the late Kazuki Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they mentioned their podcast, Heart of the Cards, and that they were going to release it, but then it was right around the time when Kazuki Takahashi had passed away, so then they made their first episode dedicated to him, so that was really sweet. And they mentioned like they would have, if they could, they would go back and voice the entire original Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, but unfortunately they can't because there's legal rights and everything, but they did that with like the first chapter, I guess, or something, or like the first opening panel, whatever it was, just like a brief thing. That's really cool. And Dan Green was talking about like the difference between Yu-Gi-Oh! And the Pharaoh in terms of their voices, because first he was saying that they kind of, especially in the Japanese dub, I didn't know this, that they basically are purposely kind of the same voice. They're just like two sides of the same voice, which makes sense in terms of the characterizations. But in the English dub, it became more so Yugi sounding younger, and then the Pharaoh kind of having a more commanding voice and everything, and like commanding, confident voice. And what was so hilarious was that Dan Green said the joke in the booth, because like they were saying, he was saying basically people would always ask me like, how can I do this higher pitched voice for Yugi and this lower voice for the Pharaoh? And he said the joke in the booth was that I had removable testicles. That's hilarious. My God. I was like, oh my goodness. That's so fun to get like a higher voice for Yugi. That's so funny. Oh my gosh. But, you know, again, like it's true that, because they acknowledge too that they're saying, well, part of it certainly is like, yeah, the show in a way, it's like, yeah, you're selling the trading cards, but also what resonates obviously are the themes of Yu-Gi-Oh!, namely about friendship and being there for each other and teamwork, things like that. And what he also mentioned that I found honestly really beautiful and something that I never would have expected to hear was that he said a fan had come up to him at one point, because again, like people share their personal stories with the franchise and like how the show helps them through dark times, whatever it may be, like really personal stories that like how the show helps them in any way. And what he said was that someone had come up to him at a previous convention and said to him that this show helped me because when I was younger, I used to be a bully, and that this show helped me change my ways. I was like, look at that person admitting that. That takes a lot of growth and maturity. So I respect whoever that fan was, of realizing and like, you know, just looking inside themselves, that this show helped them in any way. I find that really beautiful and profound. That just goes back to like the beauty of art and storytelling, honestly. You have these characters that people can resonate with, that can help with positive change. That's so beautiful. So I love that he shared that, and that obviously was like something meaningful to him to like recall that and share that with all of us at that panel. I thought that was beautiful, because obviously too on the flip side of that, people sharing how they were bullied, but that this show was comfort to them. I just find that all really sweet. I don't know. So that was really great, just seeing them in person. And like just their rapport, the two of them, they have such like respect and admiration of each other, these two voice actors, you know. And obviously they do other things. Like I know Eric Stewart mentions he's in a band, and like obviously he voice directed this show and stuff like that. And Dan Green is like, does all this amazing artwork. So that's beautiful that they're just so talented. And then the last panel was a Disney panel with Brett Iwan, the current voice of Mickey Mouse. And that too, just him kind of dipping into the voice here and there. Because also with Dan Green, when he a little bit, he was doing Yugi's voice, and then a Tem, you know, the Pharaoh in the first episode, like when he says, Exodia, obliterate. Amazing. Again, just like that spark of, oh, there's the character come to life. Amazing. So I love all that. Because then in terms of with Kaiba, like Eric Stewart was saying how, well, Kaiba is a rival, he's not a villain, and it's like pushing the Pharaoh and like, you know, that relationship. So it's all interesting. I don't know, like just hearing about their perspective on the character dynamics. But so the Mickey panel was a lot of fun, because similarly, like how they have other talents and everything, Brett Iwan, in fact, he said he got his degree in illustration and graphic design. And so he never knew he'd become a voice actor. And so then like it just was like this wonderful happenstance that he was able to audition and get the role of Mickey Mouse. And he's been voicing him now since 2009, 15 years. That's really cool. And he was dipping in and out of the voice too. And again, just that spark of joy, because obviously there's so much to be said about Disney as a corporation, but taking all of that out of it and just the purity of like the simple joy and positivity of Mickey Mouse and the characterization of Mickey. Because what he mentioned too was that sometimes people like do impressions, and some of them do really great impressions, but sometimes people get like misinterpret the voice, which I find interesting too. He said like it's a falsetto voice, but it's not super high. And he said like there's a Midwestern quality to Mickey Mouse. I was like, this is interesting, hearing this perspective a little bit, because you don't necessarily think of all that when you hear Mickey. Like, huh? Oh boy. Everyone could do like their impression. I didn't making myself laugh. Sometimes like when I try to, oh boy, that's too funny, try to do these voices. But you know, but he was doing a little bit of the voice here and there. But again, just like that spark of joy that Mickey Mouse brings. I think that's wonderful. And he said like a lot of people ask him about like what's his favorite project, and for him he likes doing, he said like it's hard to choose, but he enjoys doing the stuff with the parks. So that's really cool. And like basically because obviously Mickey Mouse, the original voice, was Walt Disney himself. And so, I don't know, he just seemed like such an amazing person, too, just hearing a little bit about his journey. And he mentioned Aladdin was one of his favorite Disney movies. I was like, oh, me too. Aladdin's my all-time fave, too great. So it just was a lot of fun. It really was. And just hearing these voice actors have such reverence for each other and for their characters, it's a really beautiful thing. I just really love all that. So again, it goes back to like that spark of joy and love and admiration and excitement, and how it creates this community. Because also what Eric Stewart had said was, like, all of us like being nerds and geeks for things we love, and like he said, like he's like a gamer geek, and that it's just like creates this community of things we love, and we're here to celebrate all that, and that like it's a lovely thing at these conventions. Everyone's so supportive and polite and kind and happy to be there and excited to meet fans and everything. And this connection with these characters and these shows we grew up with. So it just was really fun. So I love all that. So it was really sweet. And like, fun time at the panels. And as always, I'm looking forward to my next fan convention. And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com. And as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.